What drives a man to cross the line between thought and action, to commit a crime so dark that it shatters his soul? In the feverish streets of St. Petersburg, one young man dares to test whether he is above morality, above law, above humanity itself. But what begins as an idea soon becomes a nightmare. This is Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, a haunting journey through guilt, redemption, and a fragile boundary between good and evil. Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, once a promising student, lives now in abject poverty. His existence has shrunk to a tiny garret room in the slums of St. Petersburg, a space so cramped and airless that it feels more like a coffin than a home. The ceiling hangs low, the furniture is meager, and the oppressive heat of summer presses down on him. This room mirrors his state of mind, isolated, suffocated, and increasingly detached from the rhythm of ordinary life. Raskolnikov is proud, intelligent, and tormented by thoughts that he cannot share with anyone. He has withdrawn from society, even from friends like Razumikin, who might have offered comfort. Poverty gnaws at him, but what consumes him even more is his pride. He cannot bear to take help, cannot endure humiliation, and cannot accept a life of mediocrity. Beneath this outward suffering brews a dangerous theory, one that will soon spill into action. He convinces himself that certain men, extraordinary men, stand above the laws of morality. Figures like Napoleon, he argues, could commit crimes, even murder, if it served a higher purpose. Why then should he, Raskolnikov, not be permitted to do the same? What is one useless, malicious old woman weighed against the possibility of a greater life, a higher destiny? This old woman is Alyona Ivanovna, a pawnbroker who preys on the desperate poor with usurious loans. To Raskolnikov, she is not just an individual, but a symbol of human parasitism, a louse whose death could rid the world of evil and release resources for better use. But Raskolnikov's idea is not just cold philosophy. It is fevered, half-mad, and deeply personal. He rehearses the act in his mind, even visits Alyona under the pretense of pawning an item. Each step he takes is accompanied by doubt, hesitation, and a strange mixture of revulsion and exhilaration. He oscillates between clarity and delirium, between grand reasoning and petty fears. He wonders endlessly whether he has the courage to act, or whether he is just another coward lost in thought. Finally, the opportunity comes. He learns that Alyona will be alone at a certain hour, driven less by calm calculation than by a sudden feverish impulse. He arms himself with an axe hidden under his coat and makes his way to her apartment. The streets of St. Petersburg blur before him. Filthy alleys, crowded markets, and the oppressive heat all seem to conspire, as though the very city is pushing him toward his destiny. Inside the pawnbroker's apartment, the air is heavy and suffocating. The old woman bends over her work, unsuspecting. In one swift and brutal act, Raskolnikov strikes her with the axe. The blow falls, and Alyona Ivanovna collapses. Blood seeps across the floor, warm and sticky, clinging to his shoes. For a moment, time seems to freeze. His theory, once abstract, is now incarnate in blood. But the act does not end as he imagined. Lizaveta, Alyona's innocent sister, enters unexpectedly. She is simple, defenseless, incapable of malice. Yet in his frenzy, Raskolnikov strikes again. This second murder is not justified by any theory. It is raw, chaotic, and senseless. In that instant, his philosophical justification collapses. The crime he had convinced himself was rational now reveals itself as something else entirely, an act of madness. Panicked, Raskolnikov searches for valuables but finds little worth taking. His hands shake, his mind reels. Every sound in the building feels amplified. The creak of a floorboard, the murmur of voices outside, the echo of footsteps on the stairs. He stuffs a few trinkets into his pockets, but the spoils are pitiful compared to the weight of guilt he now carries. He flees the apartment, terrified he will be caught at any moment. The streets, which had earlier seemed to propel him, toward the murder, now close in on him, suffocating with suspicion and fear. Somehow, almost miraculously, he escapes without immediate detection. But freedom brings no relief. Instead, he finds himself haunted, not just by the fear of arrest, but by the crushing knowledge of what he has done. The act is complete, yet it marks only the beginning of his torment. Raskolnikov has stepped over the line, and nothing in his life, or in his mind, will ever be the same again. The days following the murder pass in a haze of delirium and dread. Raskolnikov, once proud and restless, collapses into a state of feverish illness. He lies in his cramped room, sweating and trembling, drifting in and out of consciousness. His landlady grows concerned, and Razumikin, his loyal, good-natured friend, steps in to care for him. Razumikin, full of energy and warmth, contrasts starkly with Raskolnikov's cold isolation. He brings food, medicine, and companionship, but Raskolnikov accepts his help reluctantly, torn between gratitude and shame. The contrast between Razumikin's generosity and Raskolnikov's pride only deepens the young man's inner torment. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov's mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, and his sister, Avdotya Romanovna, known as Dunya, arrive in St. Petersburg. They are filled with concern for him, having heard of his strange letters and erratic behavior. Their arrival forces Raskolnikov to confront another layer of guilt. While they sacrifice everything for him, he is hiding a terrible secret. His pride prevents him from embracing their care, and he pushes them away, even as their devotion tugs at him. The city itself becomes an extension of Raskolnikov's fevered mind. St. Petersburg's sweltering heat, its crowded taverns, its noisy streets, all press in on him, amplifying his paranoia. Every glance feels suspicious, every encounter a possible betrayal. He is convinced that at any moment someone will point a finger and declare him the murderer. And indeed, suspicion begins to circle. The police summon Raskolnikov for questioning, though at first it is only about a debt owed to his landlady. Yet during the visit, subtle remarks and veiled questions hint at something deeper. Raskolnikov's nerves betray him. He faints unexpectedly in the police station, creating more doubt than clarity. Though they lack concrete evidence, the investigators sense something unusual about him. In particular, Porfiry Petrovich, the astute examining magistrate, begins to take an interest. Porfiry is no ordinary investigator. He is cunning, psychological, and patient. Rather than rush to arrest Raskolnikov, he draws him into conversations about crime, morality, and the nature of guilt. In these exchanges, Porfiry pretends to be casual, even friendly, but beneath the surface he studies every word, every pause, every flicker in Raskolnikov's expression. Their meetings feel less like legal interrogations and more like duels of the mind. Porfiry knows that catching a murderer is not simply a matter of evidence. It is a matter of conscience. For Raskolnikov, these encounters are unbearable. His theories about extraordinary men, once his source of pride, now sound hollow in Porfiry's presence. Each time he defends them, he feels as though he is exposing himself further. He senses that Porfiry is waiting for him to betray himself, to speak not as a theorist but as a guilty man. The pressure builds, twisting his thoughts and fueling his paranoia. At the same time, Raskolnikov's interactions with others deepen the novel's moral conflict. He sees Sonia Marmeladov again, the humble young woman forced into prostitution to support her family. Her quiet dignity and faith unsettle him. She represents everything he has rejected: selflessness, humility, and belief in redemption. Her presence lingers in his mind, a silent rebuke to his pride and defiance. As his illness ebbs and flows, Raskolnikov wanders the city in restless agitation. He revisits the pawnbroker's apartment, as if compelled by magnetic force, unable to sever himself from the scene of the crime. He overhears conversations about the murders, each rumor tightening the noose of guilt around his neck. Even when others are falsely accused or confess under pressure, Raskolnikov feels no relief. Their mistakes only mirror his own concealed truth. By the end of Part 2, Raskolnikov is trapped in an invisible prison of his own making. The law has not yet caught him, but his conscience has. He is surrounded by love from his family, loyalty from Razumikin, suspicion from Porfiry, and compassion from Sonia. Yet he remains alone, isolated by the secret he cannot confess. The weight of his crime presses heavier with each passing day, driving him deeper into fever, paranoia, and the slow unraveling of his mind. Part 3 deepens the moral and emotional conflicts surrounding Raskolnikov, weaving together the threads of family, love, sacrifice, and his ever-growing inner turmoil. Raskolnikov's fragile condition continues, but now his isolation is punctured by the arrival of his mother and sister. Pulcheria Alexandrovna brings with her letters filled with love and desperation, expressing the family's sacrifices for his sake. These letters weigh heavily on Raskolnikov, each line a reminder of how much he means to them, and how deeply he is failing them. His sister, Avdotya Romanovna, or Dunya, embodies strength and quiet dignity. Her beauty and determination catch the eye of others, but she is steadfast in her devotion to her family, willing to sacrifice her own happiness for their survival. The looming issue in Part 3 is Dunya's engagement to Pyotr Petrovich Luzin, a wealthy but manipulative man. Luzin presents himself as respectable and benevolent, but his motives are calculated. He seeks to control Dunya, believing that by marrying a poor woman from a struggling family, he will always have the upper hand. For Raskolnikov, this is unbearable. The thought that his proud and noble sister might bind herself to a man like Luzin, out of necessity and sacrifice, torments him. He lashes out against the marriage, his rage fueled not only by brotherly love, but also by the sharp contrast between Dunya's selfless sacrifice and his own selfish crime. Meanwhile, another figure steps more prominently into Raskolnikov's world, Sonia Marmeladov. Sonia lives in desperate poverty, driven into prostitution to support her stepmother Katerina Ivanovna and the children. Her life is marked by suffering and humiliation, yet she bears it with humility and faith. When Raskolnikov interacts with her, he is struck by her quiet endurance. She does not complain, nor does she carry herself with bitterness. Instead, she radiates a kind of spiritual strength that unsettles him deeply. Sonia's suffering mirrors Dunya's willingness to sacrifice herself for her family. Both women, in their different ways, embody virtues that Raskolnikov cannot understand or emulate: faith, compassion, and selflessness. Against their examples, his philosophy of extraordinary men appears increasingly hollow. His theory justifies murder in pursuit of greatness. But what kind of greatness could ever rival the moral strength of Sonia's humility or Dunya's sacrifice? This part of the novel also heightens the social tensions around Raskolnikov. Luzin attempts to ingratiate himself with Pulcheria and Dunya, presenting himself as a protector. But his arrogance and veiled contempt for the family soon emerge. Raskolnikov openly clashes with him, rejecting Luzin's offer of security and exposing his manipulative nature. The conflict escalates into a battle not only for Dunya's future, but also for the moral direction of the family. At the same time, Raskolnikov's inner torment continues to consume him. He oscillates between bursts of defiance and crushing waves of guilt. He feels drawn to Sonia, compelled by her purity, but he is also ashamed to be in her presence. She represents the possibility of redemption, but also the unbearable mirror of his own moral failure. He begins to confide in her, not yet fully confessing his crime, but allowing her presence to seep into his conscience. Sonia listens with quiet compassion, never condemning him outright, and this response unsettles him more than any accusation could. Through Sonia and Dunya, Dostoevsky constructs a powerful contrast. While Raskolnikov pursues pride and isolation, these women embody endurance, sacrifice, and faith. Their choices highlight the emptiness of his theories and force him to confront the possibility that strength lies not in transgression, but in suffering and compassion. By the end of Part 3, the psychological storm inside Raskolnikov is more violent than ever. He sees around him examples of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness, but he remains trapped in pride and torment. Sonia's presence, however, begins to plant a seed, one that will grow into the possibility of confession and redemption. For now, though, he remains suspended between two worlds, the world of his crime, which drags him into darkness, and the world of compassion, which beckons him toward the light. Part 4 intensifies the psychological battle surrounding Raskolnikov. It is here that the web of suspicion, manipulation, and moral confrontation tightens around him, forcing his inner torment closer to the breaking point. Raskolnikov, restless and feverish, cannot resist returning again and again to the scenes and conversations connected with the murder. He feels a strange compulsion to revisit the pawnbroker's apartment, to linger near the police, and to draw himself into conversations that should terrify him. It is as though his guilt demands exposure, while his pride still clings desperately to concealment. These compulsions place him directly in the path of Porfiry Petrovich, the investigator who now takes center stage. Porfiry's brilliance lies not in evidence, but in psychology. He does not accuse Raskolnikov outright. Instead, he invites him into long, seemingly casual discussions about crime, law, and morality. In one such encounter, Porfiry introduces the notion of the extraordinary man who might have the right to step over moral boundaries for the sake of progress. Raskolnikov, who had once convinced himself of this very idea, finds the topic unbearable. He cannot resist defending the theory, yet every word he utters feels like self-betrayal. Porfiry listens carefully, his tone disarmingly polite, but beneath it, he is tightening a psychological noose. The duel between the two men is not one of evidence and confession, but of intellect and conscience. Raskolnikov feels trapped, as though Porfiry can see directly into his soul. Meanwhile, the subplot surrounding Dunya and Luzin escalates. Luzin's true character becomes increasingly apparent. He is not a noble protector, but a manipulative opportunist, intent on marrying Dunya so he can dominate her and bask in his supposed generosity. When Luzin attempts to impose his will, both Dunya and her family resist. Raskolnikov, in particular, erupts in anger, openly humiliating Luzin and denouncing his intentions. The confrontation exposes Luzin's pettiness and cruelty, leaving his schemes in tatters. For Raskolnikov, however, this moment of righteous indignation does not bring relief. It only underscores the irony that while he defends his sister's dignity, his own hands are stained with blood. Amidst this turmoil, Sonia's role deepens. She continues to live in poverty, burdened by her stepmother Katerina Ivanovna's failing health and the needs of her siblings. Despite her suffering, Sonia radiates compassion and humility. Raskolnikov is drawn to her, compelled by a force he cannot explain. He visits her small, shabby room, where he feels both shame and a strange sense of comfort. Sonia listens to him without judgment, offering kindness when he least deserves it. In her presence, he feels a possibility of redemption, but also an unbearable pressure, as though her purity silently demands his confession. Katerina Ivanovna, Sonia's stepmother, embodies another side of human suffering. Once proud and noble, she has been reduced to desperation by poverty and illness. Her frantic attempts to maintain dignity in the face of destitution mirror, in a distorted way, Raskolnikov's own pride. Her decline adds another layer of tragedy to Sonia's burden and underscores the novel's relentless depiction of suffering as an inescapable part of human existence. As Part 4 progresses, Raskolnikov's paranoia deepens. Every conversation feels like a trap, every glance a threat. He senses Porfiry's eyes on him, even when they are apart. The psychological cat and mouse between them reaches unbearable tension. Yet Porfiry does not strike. He waits, certain that guilt will wear Raskolnikov down far more effectively than accusation or proof ever could. By the close of this section, Raskolnikov is caught in a tightening vice. Porfiry's suspicions grow sharper, Sonia's compassion presses on his conscience, and his family's devotion highlights the selfishness of his secret. He lashes out in pride and defensiveness, but beneath it all, the cracks in his facade widen. The world around him is closing in, and his own conscience is beginning to betray him more loudly than any investigator ever could. Part 5 raises the emotional and moral stakes to their highest point yet. Here, Raskolnikov's inner torment intensifies. Sonia emerges as a figure of profound influence, and the themes of sacrifice, guilt, and redemption take center stage. The chapter opens with the collapse of Katerina Ivanovna's fragile life. Her illness worsens, and her mind frays under the pressure of poverty and humiliation. She clings to the remnants of her noble past, insisting on dignity even as she staggers through the streets in desperation. Her frantic energy culminates in a tragic spiral that brings her to an early death. The children she leaves behind fall entirely upon Sonia's shoulders, deepening the burden already crushing her. Sonia's quiet acceptance of this role, her willingness to bear others' suffering without complaint, makes a stark contrast to Raskolnikov's tortured pride. Where he resists and rebels, she endures and gives. Raskolnikov, meanwhile, feels increasingly drawn to Sonia. He visits her small, poor lodgings, seeking both refuge and confrontation. Their conversations grow heavier, circling around questions of sin, suffering, and salvation. Sonia listens with patience as Raskolnikov speaks in veiled hints of his torment. She does not condemn him, nor does she excuse him. Instead, she offers compassion and the possibility of hope. In her presence, Raskolnikov glimpses a path beyond despair, though he is not yet ready to walk it. One of the most powerful moments in this part is Sonia's reading of the story of Lazarus from the Gospel of John. In her trembling voice, she recounts the miracle of resurrection, Christ calling Lazarus from the tomb. The scene is heavy with symbolism. Raskolnikov, spiritually dead under the weight of guilt, listens as Sonia speaks words of renewal and life. Though he remains resistant, the story plants a seed in his heart. For the first time, he entertains the possibility that redemption might be possible, even for him. Parallel to these spiritual developments, the external drama continues. Luzin, having failed to secure Dunya's hand in marriage, attempts one last act of malice. He schemes to frame Sonia for theft, planting money on her to destroy her reputation. But the plot unravels. Raskolnikov, Razumikin, and others expose Luzin's deception, leaving him disgraced. This episode not only reveals Luzin's corruption, but also underscores Sonia's innocence and moral strength. Even when falsely accused, she remains composed, her dignity intact. Her ability to endure humiliation without bitterness further elevates her in Raskolnikov's eyes. At the same time, Raskolnikov's relationship with Porfiry Petrovich moves towards climax. Porfiry continues his subtle interrogation, but now he begins to speak more openly. He tells Raskolnikov that he knows, or at least believes, that he is the murderer. Yet Porfiry does not threaten immediate arrest. Instead, he appeals to Raskolnikov's conscience, urging him to confess voluntarily. He argues that confession will be less about punishment and more about salvation, about reclaiming his humanity. Porfiry, in his own way, mirrors Sonia. Both point Raskolnikov toward the truth, though one does so through compassion and the other through psychological strategy. Raskolnikov, however, still resists. His pride remains strong. His theory of the extraordinary man still haunts him. He tells himself he can endure, that he is not like the ordinary masses who bend under guilt. Yet cracks begin to show. His outbursts of rage, his restless wanderings, and his inability to sever himself from Sonia all betray the truth. He is unraveling. Part 5 closes with an intensification of these tensions. Sonia's faith and compassion stand before him as an open door to redemption, while Porfiry's probing closes in from the other side. Raskolnikov is trapped between his pride and his conscience, his crime and the possibility of salvation. The stage is set for the final confrontation with himself, where denial can no longer hold back the tide of truth. In Part 6, the narrative reaches its most intense psychological pitch. Raskolnikov's torment can no longer be contained, and the forces pressing upon him, from Porfiry's relentless probing to Sonia's compassion, finally converge. This is the section where his fate is sealed, not by external evidence alone, but by the unbearable weight of his conscience. The first major confrontation comes with Porfiry Petrovich. Unlike their earlier exchanges, this meeting sheds the mask of casual conversation. Porfiry speaks more directly now, admitting that he strongly suspects Raskolnikov of being the murderer. Yet what is striking is his approach. He does not present damning evidence or attempt to intimidate Raskolnikov into submission. Instead, Porfiry appeals to his humanity. He urges him to confess voluntarily, insisting that true punishment is not the Siberian exile or the judge's verdict, but the torment of a guilty conscience. He tells Raskolnikov that by confessing, he will find peace and that he will not stand alone. There will be understanding, perhaps even compassion, for his struggle. Raskolnikov listens, tense and restless. He tries to maintain his facade, to insist upon his theories, but Porfiry's words pierce deeply. This is no longer a battle of intellects. It is a plea for Raskolnikov's soul. Porfiry believes that guilt, left to fester, will destroy him more completely than any prison could. This moment underscores one of Dostoevsky's central themes. Crime is punished not only by law but by the human conscience itself. After this encounter, Raskolnikov's inner storm rages more violently. He wanders the city, unable to rest, haunted by the memory of blood and by the silent judgment of every passerby. At the same time, he feels drawn more powerfully than ever to Sonia. Her presence becomes essential to him, like a fragile lifeline in a sea of guilt. He visits her again, and in one of the novel's most pivotal scenes, he finally confesses the truth. In halting words, broken by shame and despair, he admits that he killed Alyona Ivanovna, and Lizaveta as well. Sonia's reaction is not horror or condemnation. Instead, she embraces him with compassion. She weeps for him, but she does not turn away. For Sonia, his confession is not the end, but the beginning. She tells him that he must accept his suffering, that only through repentance can he find redemption. She becomes his moral compass, urging him toward the humility he has long resisted. Her unwavering love reveals a path of salvation that no theory of extraordinary men could ever provide. Meanwhile, Dunya learns the truth about her brother's crime. The revelation devastates her, yet her love for him does not break. Her confrontation with Raskolnikov is filled with pain and disbelief, but also with loyalty. She cannot comprehend his actions, but she refuses to abandon him. This moment reinforces the theme that true love, whether from family or from Sonia, does not vanish in the face of sin. The climax of Part 6 arrives when Raskolnikov, urged by Sonia, goes to a public square. There, in an act of symbolic surrender, he kneels at a crossroads and declares aloud, "It was I who killed," though the words are faint, almost drowned out by the noise of the city. They mark the collapse of his pride and the first step toward redemption. He surrenders himself to the authorities, not as a defeated criminal, but as a broken man beginning to rise again through humility. The legal outcome is swift. Raskolnikov is sentenced to penal servitude in Siberia. Yet Dostoevsky makes clear that the real punishment has already been endured. The gnawing of guilt, the sleepless nights, the fevered torment of a conscience in rebellion against itself. His exile will be harsh, but it carries within it the possibility of transformation. He will not face it alone. Sonia chooses to follow him, her love steadfast even in the bleak Siberian landscape. By the close of Part 6, Raskolnikov stands on the threshold of rebirth. His theories of superiority have crumbled, his pride has been broken, and he has confessed both to the law and to the people he loves. What remains is the long road of suffering and atonement, through which, perhaps, he may one day find peace. In Siberia, Raskolnikov remains cold and distant at first, resentful of his punishment. But Sonia's unwavering love softens him. Slowly, he awakens to a new life, not through philosophy or pride, but through humility, suffering, and compassion. The novel closes not with finality, but with possibility. The suggestion that even in the darkest soul, redemption can spark anew. Crime and Punishment is not just a story about crime or even about punishment. It is about conscience. It asks whether suffering can purify, whether love can redeem, and whether any of us are truly above the moral law. Dostoevsky does not give easy answers. Instead, he plunges us into the terrifying labyrinth of the human soul, forcing us to confront our own shadows. If you found this journey through Dostoevsky's masterpiece illuminating, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into literature's greatest works. Until next time, remember, the greatest battles are often fought within ourselves.